A Guten Erev Shabbos. What do we want? Asks Chaya Rivka Zvolinsky, who is a contemporary Torah teacher. She's one of the leading exponents of the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, and she answers her own question. What do we want? To feel less pain and more optimism, to lead happy and meaningful lives. And she adds that all this requires healthy relationships. Now, this year in particular, when there's so much in our lives that makes us nervous and anxious and seems threatening even to our very health and our sense of well-being, we're in need of some of that optimism all the more so. We have that much more need for meaningfulness in every day, so all the days don't just blend one into the next, 1 week or month into the next. We need, quite simply, to make every day count. So this period of Sfiras HaOmer, counting the Omer, 49 days, 7 complete weeks, from the day after the first day of Pesach until Shavuos, is a shining example of how, quite literally, we can make each day count. In fact, this mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer, more than any other, is literally, as its name implies, a mitzvah to make each day count. In one of our Torah classes this week, we looked at an explanation of Sfiras HaOmer, counting the Omer, from the Shibbolei HaLeket. Shibbolei HaLeket, the collection of gathering, of sheaves or ears, was written in Italy in the 1200s, in the 13th century, and the author collected the halacha for the Jews of his community in Rome and for the region. He drew on Medrash to explain the connection between different parts in Jewish law, Jewish life. So now that we are today about 5/7 of the way through counting the Omer, Friday is Lag BaOmer, and Sunday will have completed 5 weeks of the counting. But it's never too late to get some more insight into what we're doing, even in the middle of while we're doing it. Also, this week's very Parsha details the Omer offering as well as the mitzvah of counting, Parshas Emor. So that's a cue for us to pause for a moment for a deeper look. So here's what the Parsha itself says in Leviticus chapter 23, beginning in verse 10. It says, "When you come into the land which I am giving you, says God to us, and you reap the harvest, you should bring an Omer measure from the first of your harvest to the Kohen." An Omer is a dry measure, like a bushel or a peck. In fact, it's about 9.5 cups, or 1/16 of a bushel, 1/4 of a peck, about 2.5 liters of grain. That's about as accurate as we can get. And by the way, barley is the first crop to ripen and be ready for reaping. So it's barley we're talking about. Basically, no great surprises here. Bring the first bit of your harvest to the temple as an offering in recognition of where it all comes from. Then a few verses later in Pasuk Yud Gimel, verse 13, it says, "From the day after the holiday of Pesach, the day you bring the Omer as a wave offering, you should count for yourselves 7 complete weeks." It says, "Usfartem lechem mimacharas haShabbos, miyom haviachem es Omer hatnufa, sheva Shabbosos temimos, tihiyena." So on this mitzvah, on these verses, the Shibbolei HaLeket, whose name is Rabbi Tzidkiah Anav, again from Rome, he asks, what's the connection, one to the other? Why is this important? Why is Shavuot, the holiday of Shavuos, connected with this counting? And he speaks to the question, quoting a Medrash Agadata. He doesn't cite a source, but he says, when we were going out of Egypt, we were also informed at the same time, not only would we be going out of Egypt, we would be receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai 50 days later. And Rabbi Anav says, out of great love, Israel counted each day. This is what he's writing. 1 day passed and a second day, and so too with all of them, as it seemed to be a long time because of their great love. For this reason, counting this time period was established for generations to come. In other words, our excitement for reaching and standing together at and receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai inspired us to count the days until it happened. This was such a powerful experience that year, that first year of freedom, such a memorable and noteworthy event in our history, all its anticipation and excitement, that we counted the days then, and we're continuing to reenact that excitement in all times, to count, to get ourselves ready in the right state of mind, and be ready to receive the Torah on Shavuot. Beautiful idea. Now, when we analyzed this mitzvah in our shir this week, we talked about its relevance nowadays, which we just addressed somewhat with a degree of clarity. We also investigated counting the Omer as a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, as the phrase goes. Frequently we say that such mitzvot, positive time-bound commandments, include an exemption for women. But we learned that in the Ashkenazi world, women have taken on the mitzvah of Sfirat Omer, counting the Omer as obligatory, and therefore count with a bracha each day. As far as that idea goes, we talked about why it's so important to count each day, and what happens if you miss a day. Can the counting then be considered complete? What should one do? Short answer, a person who misses a day does continue to count. That's not the opinion of all of the poskim, all the halakhic authorities, but that is the one which we follow. So a person who misses one continues the count, but without the bracha. We didn't go into depth on the issue, but there's plenty more to say about this. You have a number of interesting intellectual exercises in halacha related to Sfiras HaOmer. If your counting has to be complete and you can't miss a day, then what about Katan Shenasa Bar Mitzvah? What about a child who reaches the age of Bar or Bat Mitzvah during the Omer time period? They're a child not obligated in mitzvot at the beginning, but let's say on day 22 or day 37, suddenly they're Bar or Bas Mitzvah. Now they're obligated in the mitzvahs. So we have we have 3 of those in our family. When they start counting now as an adult, can it be considered complete with those countings that they did before Bar Bat Mitzvah, when they were still a child, as it were? And whatever answer you'll give, is that same answer applicable to Ger Shenis Gayer, a convert who completes the process of Giyur during the Sfira? Is theirs also a complete counting? They were counting before, and now they're continuing to count. Is it all one continuous counting? And once you figure that one out, tell me about Eved Shenishtachrer, a slave who's freed during the Omer. Can their counting as a free person be considered on the same level, a continuation of their previous status as an indentured servant? Okay, good questions all. But back to the main idea of us counting, each of us completely. The verse did say, Usvartem lachem, you should count for yourself. Lachem is for you. This suggests that each person must do the counting on their own. Other things are counted, other time periods are counted, but not necessarily by each of us. The Beit Din, the rabbinic court, of course, proclaims the months, Rosh Chodesh, and also keeps track of the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year in the land of Israel, which, by the way, the next one is starting this Rosh Hashanah, 5,782, Tafshin Pei Beis. We don't keep track of that ourselves necessarily. I'm sure the farmers and vintners in Israel are very aware of the Shemitah cycle, but we don't have a mitzvah each Rosh Hashanah to say this year is 5,781, which is the 6th year in the 7th year cycle. We don't do that. For our convenience, the Ezra's Torah Luach, the little pocket-sized Luach booklet that we use in Shul, does that for us actually. The Yovel years, the Jubilee years, once every 50 years, 7 sevens, the seventh, the one after every 7 sets of 7 years, is also counted by the Beit Din, not by us. And wouldn't you know, in the times of exile, we lost track. Nobody knows with absolute certainty exactly when the Jubilee year is. Meshech Chochmah connects counting the days to purification, as in purifying ourselves to be proper vessels for the Torah, he explains. And the Maharal of Prague explains that counting the Omer connects the process of planting and harvesting, working in the fields, connects that to Torah. As we learned last week in Pirkei Avos, im ein kemach, im ein Torah. Im ein Torah, in kemach. If there's no flour, there's no Torah. If there's no Torah, there's no flour. The Abarbanel says that if you're working in the fields, you might get caught up in your work and forget that there's a Yom Tov coming. Sforno connects Shavuos as well as Sukkot to the respective harvests of the spring and the fall, at the beginning and towards the beginning and at the end of the growing season. Both holidays give us a sense of appreciation and gratitude for the seasons and the cycle of nature that God gives us, well, at least in the northern hemisphere anyway. Even for those of us who are not farmers, we know that at all times, in all situations, we reap what we sow. So in that sense, the time we invest in preparation for receiving the Torah at Shavuot, even these last 2 weeks of counting the Omer, that stands us in a better stead, in a better place to appreciate what we have and what we will receive, and what we receive every day. How do we prepare ourselves? At minimum, counting the days. If you forgot, you can start today without a bracha. We've been on again, off again, using the 48 attributes through which Torah is acquired to mark the days as we advance from Pesach to Shavuos. I let a few of those slide. I'm sorry for that oversight, and I apologize. We were doing it every day on the video using a book by Rabbi Lanzer, taking the 48 attributes from Pirkei Avos. We sort of dropped that ball at a certain point. We'll pick it up again. Last year we did an in-depth day-by-day combination, study and investigation of the combination of the Sfirot, 7 times 7 Spheros, as we did explained in greater depth with practical suggestions what those little Sfirot, Tif'eres, Shebechesed, and all that's printed in your Siddur, what all that means. And you can, of course, continue to do that this year. If you need the web links, let me know. What does it all really mean? This time is an especially auspicious time to examine our spiritual and our emotional constitution, to see where we're holding, as they say, to take stock of and address what we can work on. You'll say that isn't that the work of Elul leading up to Rosh Hashanah? Or you could argue, isn't it possible or even necessary to do tshuva every day? You're absolutely right. And this 7-week stretch underscores that, focuses a spotlight on it, and serves it up on a platter to us in a way that makes it very appetizing and eminently doable. You might think that Kabbalat Torah, receiving the Torah on Shavuos, would be a purely intellectual exercise. So maybe we should do some mental gymnastics, learn a lot of Gemara every day to prepare ourselves for Shavuos. Not a bad idea. And this approach that we're discussing today not only supports that, but even goes against the grain also to a certain extent. Torah is not only cerebral, it's for our entire being. It's for our emotions, for our spirit also. In fact, for the whole of all of our being can be a vessel for Torah. It's not just a series of do's and don'ts, purely an intellectual undertaking. Our midos of love and kindness, patience, judgment, discipline, endurance, compassion, all these can be vessels for and supports of Torah in us as well. Of course, we recognize that they're all present and indwelling in all of us, and with purposefulness, with attentiveness, with active and engaged refinement of ourselves, we can become ever more attuned, ever more sensitive, ever more appreciative, and all the more complete and satisfied and happy with each day, and by extension, our entire lives. Shabbat Shalom.